Hello, everybody. Hopefully we're now live. Welcome to episode 3 of the Big Conference live streams. These are in the run-up to the Big Conference, which is held in London, Kensington Town Halls, very soon actually. End of September the 28th. 29th in London, Kensington Town Halls. We've got the Big Conference. It's basically everyone invited. If you're vegan, if you're an activist, campaigner, perhaps not yet vegan, but interested in all this interesting areas of animal rights, veganism, and plant-based shifts to plant-based food systems, and it's very much a conference for you. It's a gathering of the main groups, a lot of grassroots activists, some core vegan community, sort of movers and shakers, some really dynamic, interesting speakers, panels, lots of panels, workshops, lots of workshops, celebration stage where there's lots of interesting interviews and presentations such like, and a smattering of comedy. Andrea Neil is coming along, Carl Donnelly, who's a Veganuary ambassador, he's going to be doing a set. And of course, being vegan, we have cake and we have food in abundance. Some of the best vegan street food you've come across, some really quality, handpicked, to make sure all of the vegans there are going to be, well fed, have a really good party. It's more of a birthday party than a political party. We're celebrating a lot of birthday parties, a lot of groups have got significant anniversaries. Like, Animal Justice Project at 10, Viva at 30, Vegan Society are 80, Vegan Runners UK are 20, and of course Veganuary is 10, and Animal Aid are 47. So lots of other significant occasions. So it's definitely a party style, very much invited. The panels will be looking at some key issues. We'll be looking at how to end the use of animals in laboratories, how to end the use of animals for entertainment. There'll be a panel on real wilding, looking at creative activism, all sorts of really interesting dynamic panels. People, workshops. It's all on the VegFest website, vegfest.co.uk, and we hope to see lots of you there. It'd be amazing. Get such along. Tickets are only a tenner for the day, £80 for the weekend. Can't go far wrong from that. Of course, engage on social media and such like. It'll be a good weekend for activism. Your movement needs you. So let's get behind all those different collectives, groups, campaign groups, individuals. Really, increase our learning and understanding and effectiveness, I think. So today's live stream is really interesting. We've got 3 dynamic guests. We're just going to bring on in a minute. We'll be looking at some of the key issues and panels that we have. So first of all, a lovely warm welcome for Sash from We the Free, who I have to say, Sash, you've been absolutely phenomenal in your support for the Big Party Conference. Absolute endless supply of good energy, inputs for really good ideas, and particularly one that, you suggested this gentleman here. We're bringing Alan Jackson. Alan, hello, welcome from your boat.
Hey, how you doing?
Spokesperson for the National Animal Rights March UK, which just happened a couple of weeks ago. And our third guest, all the way from Poland in a conference, is David Rams, very well-known YouTuber and podcaster. David, thanks for joining us. Sash, thanks for joining us. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Good to be here.
Thank you, Tim.
So,
thank you. Yeah.
So we'll dive straight into the hot topic. You're all coming to the conference. You're all on different panels, workshops, such like. So we will be dealing with different aspects of that during our little episode here. But I think the big hot topic is the animal rights and human rights. We all have first-hand experience of this. I know a lot of it's an area that is probably considered the most divisive, I would say, in the movement right now. Sash, you can tell us a bit more, but I know We the Free did survey amongst activists during the spring, very much sort of split down the middle opinions on this. There have been some threats of boycott. There's been some fallouts on social media and such like over this issue. Sash, I'm going to start with you actually. You are We the Free. you are. Tell us a bit about yourself too, about how you feel about all of this. Animal rights, human rights. We're really looking about how much does human rights fit into our animal rights movement. What's your perspective here?
Hi, thank you very much, Tim. I come from a perspective of somebody who I often refer to myself as a walking and talking intersectionality. I speak with an accent. I am from a background culturally, mixed background culturally as well as racially. So from if we talk about intersectionality within the animal rights movement, so it's, for me, it's again, it's quite a salient topic and something that I would like to sort of talk to people at Vegan Party conference. So we'll have a stand there. So, and it would be great to hear other people's perspectives on that, and I will be able to share my story there as well. So thank you.
Okay, so you say it's an area of interest. Do you have any views around this? Do you, speaking as somebody who, as you mentioned, speaks with a different accent, I just take it English is not your first language. How much of this does it affect you firsthand?
It affects, it definitely personally affects me a lot, because I'm just thinking, well, if we're not including the rights of other marginalized communities, and I fit into quite a few of those. So where do I stand within that, and how included I am within sort of certain events or animal rights movement as a whole?
And you organised National Animal Rights Day, didn't you, back in, I think it was June, sort of collaboration between 5 big national groups, Save Movement, We the Free, Our Planet, there's 2 Anonymous Voices, someone else too that you probably remind me of.
Anonymous for the Voiceless.
Yeah, I mentioned that. There was a 5th one too, wasn't it?
No, there's 4. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Anyway, it was a huge. I mean, it's 200 cities across the globe, and but there was definitely threats of disruption. There was quite a big sort of human rights issue blew up over Gaza, Israel, the inclusion of a chapter in Tel Aviv that was doing National Animal Rights Day participation. So and you had to manage that partly though as the We the Free. That's under your remit. I mean, what was that like? What was that experience like?
Yeah, again, it's I can only speak from the point of view of the National Animal Rights Day, and I was representing Our Planet S2, the organization behind the National Animal Rights Day at the time. And yes, it was probably the largest collaboration of all times within the animal rights movement. And sorry, I think there was a connection issue there for a second.
It's slightly
I
lost
think we're
there,
back
yeah.
online again.
Yeah.
So, and to me, yeah. So, thank you. What I was going to say about the National Animal Rights Day, yes, it was very, very challenging to manage it, because there were threats of disruptions, and so some of it is quite violent in a way, using certain objects, that etc., and inviting other people to be involved as well. But we must remember that National Animal Rights Day and what Our Planet does too, what they stand for, it's a memorial service. Essentially, it's a funeral for non-human animals, and that's what National Animal Rights Day is for. So, is disrupting NAD would be disrupting someone's funeral.
Yes, we did have threats of disruption. I was the compere for the National Animal Rights Day, Bristol, on that day, actually, and there were threats directly to Bristol of disruption. So I did have to prepare myself how to deal with that. I say that, actually, I didn't find out about the threats of disruption until afterwards. So I've since had to prepare how I would deal with it. But I did, had to consider that. And it is challenging to do with protests and disruptions and stuff. Alan, I know that you, as the spokesperson, I shouldn't say organiser, I know it's a committee of organisers. The National Animal Rights March UK is a grassroots organisation. There's a number of people involved with that, but you're the spokesperson, I understand. And you, again, you had to deal with quite a big threats of disruption, various issues, comments, blocking, deleting comments. It all comes up, and it all gets a bit messy.
Yeah, I don't think it was that big an issue, really. People with different opinions. I mean, for NARM and for myself as well, we tend to look at things on focus and scope. The focus is obviously our non-human companions. The National Rights March is, as it says in the title, it's a march for animal rights. The movement itself, I feel, includes human rights within that, because human rights, although more developed, are just a subsect of animal rights, as we are all just animals. But that's the scope of it. Whereas for the march itself is incredibly dedicated to the rights of and non-human animals. I don't feel that it's an issue that should get in the way, really.
Yeah, it clearly does, and it does sort of rise quite a lot, and there are a lot of strong, different opinions. But I would agree with you. The National Animal Rights March, has a focus and a scope, and that comes from the original vegan social movement founders that we talk about. The focus and the scope is a very common theme that runs through, the works of people like Leslie Cross, who was around, sort of 50 years ago, right, about the early vegan social movement. And certainly, I think we all agree that, when we look at the founding of the vegan social movement, it was a time when it was basically came out of the Second World War, a time when human rights was a huge battle raging. Everybody was affected and had been quite traumatically for a long time. And all of those original pioneers, but particularly two of them, I think, Donald Watson and I think Kathleen Janaway were both conscientious objectives, which was very strong.
Very influential in their thoughts,
positions to take, and it took a lot of bravery and courage, as much as it did to put yourself on the front line. I think is to take a position of non-violence during the war. So that's National Animal Rights. So you both, it's interesting that you both dealt with these things, and they've both been, quite disruptive. There's been a lot of fallout on Facebook, I know. David, you've seen all this now. I mean, you've come into this scene. What you've been YouTubing for probably a decade or so now, is it?
About 6-7 years, something like that.
Yeah, and you've seen this sort of come up time and again. What's your input on this?
Yeah, there's no doubt that the people on either side of this are passionate and mean well, mostly. That's something that I think we overlook too often. There are obviously bad actors on both sides of this. There are bad actors who are animals only activists, and there are bad actors who are intersectional activists. And I think both sides of this argument would do well to rein in the bad actors on their own sides and calm them down, because that ultimately is what's causing the division. That, and the fact that we automatically assume negative intent of the other side, when more often than not, it's not negative. The people who are intersectional because they care. The people who are animals first because they care. it's all good things. You know, no one's an intersectional because they hate animals, and nobody's an animals only activist because they hate people. And if they are, then again, it's for that side to rein that in and try to adjust that behavior so that we don't end up with constant conflict. So I think, yeah, that's what I'm like. I've had a change of heart in the recent years where I've realized I was probably one of those bad actors making it worse. That was a pretty tough pill to swallow for myself, but I did. And so I'm spending a lot of time now trying to do some of that nudging myself, to build some bridges that I may have burned and to try to unite us a little bit better. And so that's my take on the whole thing. I mean, whether human rights belongs as a part of the animal rights movement or not, you're not going to convince people. You're not going to convince the animals only activists to change their perspective, and you're probably not going to convince the intersectionals to change their perspective. So instead of trying to change each other's minds, I think the best thing we can hope for is how can we unite and, despite our differences, continue to work together without either blocking each other or getting on each other's nerves, basically, because I think it's possible. I think we can all work side by side, even with different goals, but as long as we have some fundamentally, shared goals.
Well, yeah, well, absolutely. You know, I do think that is, we were talking earlier, is it, healthy disagreements. That doesn't mean they have to be particularly kind or pleasant, but they can still be healthy. They just don't have to be unhealthy, and they can be strong and clear, but respectful. And I like the way we touch on that, is that we have to remember the intent of nearly all of this is really good, and it's shaped by our own experiences, our lived experiences. Like Sash, your experience. You grew up in Kazakhstan, am I right? Is that right?
Yes, that's
Kazakhstan.
Right.
Yeah. So your experiences of human rights, your understanding of human rights will be shaped by your upbringing. It's something that will run deep, and it's the same for all of us, our upbringing. So a lot of the things that I remind people of, so a lot of this is hidden. We talk about intersectionality and positions of oppression and privilege and such like. A lot of these identities are also hidden. So to just assume is I think the thing that I learned from the intersectional framework, the best, is trying to put your foot in it, actually. Is just be mindful that other people are not always in a position of joyfulness and happiness with what they're experiencing. And that may well be systemic. That may well be systems. And there will be a lot of circumstances that are very difficult to shift, and those battles are really deep. And we should be mindful, if we're kind of trying to be compassionate activists, is to just be mindful that we don't often know what's going on, and that these conversations, they're not just debates; they are actually about individuals with lived experiences. And there's a degree of trauma and recognition that this is ongoing. If some people, human rights is absolutely day-to-day struggle. And there's somebody, I've just lost half my vision. I'm fortunate I've got my vision back, but for a while I had, and I found out what it was like to navigate the world with one eye, and it wasn't much fun, very dangerous. And the world isn't built for people with limited vision. It's when you find that out and you live that experience, then you think, that's should be mindful of that. It's not always possible for people to do everything that perhaps some of us take for granted, and we forget. And I think that's why I sort of grew from that framework. I look at it more as a tool, something to have in the locker. And to pull out, and particularly with the intersectional framework, sort of does point that when you've got more than one set of oppressions, so if you're living under systemic racism, maybe systemic sexism, possibly with a disability too, that can then create a further set of oppressions that you then have to live with. That's really important to recognise too. So What would you say, Sash? What was your advice to people dealing with these issues? I mean, we had, for example, vegan runners had a fallout earlier in the year. Vegan Runners UK, there's a split. There's now a new group, and again, that was over sort of inclusion of human rights issues. I'm not sure of all the details. I'm not up to speed with it all, but it's an example of what could possibly develop into a healthy split, because there's people who may be happier in that camp to get on and do their thing. Sometimes splits can be positive. It's a way the movement grows. Would you agree with that? You think that's maybe true?
When it comes to a conflict, and this is just something that I've been exploring for a while now, and I think that we should be, as humans, I mean, I don't think we can live without it. But we, instead of dwelling on it, I would suggest that we embrace it and deal with it pragmatically and constructively. We're talking about conflict, but also what you said, which struck with me, is being mindful. And mindful communication is something that I think should be mindful of. It's how we communicate with each other, and but also with ourselves as well. And just finding out where it's stemming from, and where those emotions are coming from and feelings, first of all, and just exploring it within yourself, first of all, before perhaps, I would say, even attacking this verbally, on social media, whatever that is, just see where that comes from, where that stems from. And that's something that we're going to be discussing at one of the panels on language matters, as well as the street outreach as well, and how we talk to each other, and also, but very, very importantly, to speak to have a self-talk and mindful communication with ourselves as well. So there's a lot of shaming involved in that, and this is something that I will be talking about in the workshop as well.
That's really interesting. You start to talk about language and shaming. Alan, I was going to ask you actually on the march, from the National Animal Rights March, was there any shaming chants?
Was there any shaming chants? Well, that depends on your point of view, doesn't it, really, as most things do. There were 3 occasions where the march stopped, and people shouted at buildings, Canada Goose, and a steakhouse, and somewhere else. So you could class that as getting it off your chest. You could class that as confrontational, but I don't know. People need to do it sometimes, don't they?
I mean, that's what marches
absolutely.
are.
Yeah.
They're noisy, they're in your face, they're demonstrations, they're protests, there's a release of anger and frustration. The reason I mention it, though, is because I was on the National Animal Rights Day march in Bristol in June, which was a lovely Sunday morning, 12 o'clock stroll through Bristol city centre. There was some sort of tourists out and about and mooching around, and we had a bundle of kids out the front, and we had all the animal costumes, all the inflatable cows and what have you, trapping around.
Very jolly.
Yeah, and then in the middle of it, we had this chant. Somebody on a loudspeaker started up this chant of, shame on you for the things you do. And this started resonating. And I was watching it. I was watching a few bemused passersby, so trying to work out what this was being shouted at them. And I think, I guess it kind of worked out. They could hear through the noise. It was actually, shame on you. It seemed to be directed at the passersby, the sort of general public. And I just thought, I just wanted to shrink into the paper nation, really. I had the paper to swallow. No, I really wouldn't want to be a part of that. But I understood people.
It's not the greatest outreach, is it?
It seemed to be a strange form of outreach. I mean, David, you do lots of Beacon Street outreach, and so I'm sure you'd be interested in the panel that Sasha's on, which is about language. What's your view on language? How important is it in your advocacy?
Oh yeah, it's really important. I've tried a lot of different tactics, and I've done quite recently actually a lot of research and put a lot more time into it. I've come to the conclusion that a lot of my previous language and a lot of previously the way I'd speak to people on the street is what something I would call vegan porn. I think I was doing more vegan porn than actual transformational conversations. That vegan porn, just to be clear here, it's not actual porn. It's entertainment for vegans, is what I'm saying. So I felt like a lot of my old activism was more for me and the vegans as opposed to the person I was talking to, and as opposed to the people that would watch the video. Got lots of views, lots of likes, lots of virality, but ultimately, I'm not convinced it really altered that many people's behavior. Like the percentage rate that it altered someone's behavior, I think would have been quite low. And so I've altered my language now to be a lot more, it's more collaborative with people, basically. I'm aiming for more to have them leave with more positive actions to take, as opposed to me moral grandstanding at them and giving them a dressing down, which I don't believe that is as effective as what I'm doing now personally. But the jury is still out on that. I'm still testing it out and seeing how we're going. So,
but you mentioned you're doing a bit of research. I mean, how's that shaping up? Because this is something that's coming through more and more in our movement. There's a really good sign. It says there being an investment into research and a bit of study and a bit more evidence-based. And that's not to say that we should just, necessarily discard anything, but it does help shape, where we put our resources and what looks like works better. It's a difficult one because it depends what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to achieve somebody to maybe, eat a few more plant-based meals, which is one thing, or you're trying to get somebody to perhaps challenge property status and really think about where we stand with animals. So I suppose there's different goals. Tell us a bit more about what you're actually doing. How do you measure? Because it's really valuable, I think, for street activists is to be able to gauge some kind of,
Yeah, it depends on the goal. You're 100% right.
What works.
Oh, sorry. I thought you'd finished there. There was a bit of a delay. Do you want me to go?
Yeah,
there's a huge delay. So the question was huge delay. So the question was what's changed? And like you were saying, it depends on the goal. It really does depend on the goal, because so for me, what I realized is that, you can all do this for yourselves as well. And everybody watching, do this for yourselves. Calculate how many years of life do you think you've got left? And how much of that do you think you can spend doing activism when you take away eating time, sleeping time, family time, rest time? For me, it turned out to be about 25 to 30 years. And that's if I am just, that's a pretty good number. It's probably less than that. Okay. That's me being like a good estimate. 25, 30 years. And I just realized that in that 25 to 30 years, do I want to spend my time in trying to get people to go vegan, knowing that that is unlikely to be successful, because it's very, very difficult to convince people to go vegan, actually, as you all know, right? It's very, very difficult. You got a very low success rate with that, right? Trying to get someone to go vegan. So do I want to spend the next 25 years doing that? Or do I want to spend the next 25 years getting people to make as many behavior changes as possible that help animals? Because it's far easier to encourage someone to make behavior changes, such as eliminating dairy, or eliminating meat, or eliminating whatever it is, than it is to make them, to convince them to go vegan. However, those behavior changes will contribute to someone going vegan, right? So it seemed to be, to me, that the far more efficient way of spending your time would just be to try to get to adjust people's behaviors, not necessarily to just stand there and try and tell them they need to go vegan right now, because that normally fails. Let's be honest with each other, right? It normally fails. So when I started changing that goal and started to think, okay, behavior change is what I'm after, then the conversations altered a little bit different. Instead of moral grandstanding with people, and instead of telling them, if you're not a vegan, you're an animal abuser, and really hammering it what they're responsible for. Instead of that, it's more of we establish that we agree that what's happening to animals is horrible. We establish that we agree that all of this is brutal. They've seen the video. We agree that's wrong. Okay, great. Then I ask them, what do you think you can change today to make a better world for animals? I ask them what they'll do. And the responses I've been having, I've had people say, I'm quitting dairy today. I've had people saying, I'm quitting meats today. I've had people saying, I'm going to cut down by a massive amount. These are all behavior changes that they suggested, that they said they can do, not me, them. And to me, that seems to me like a far, far better outcome, as opposed to what normally happens is which I tell them why they should go vegan for 20 minutes and they say, okay, I'll take the card. Like, they very rarely say I'm going to do it. They usually, okay, I'll look into it, or, oh, I mean, okay, you're right. You know what I mean? We kind of just bash them into giving up, basically. And so I'm trying this different route to see if it actually does result in more behavior change. With the help of We the Free, we can track people and see if they actually go through and start, you know, doing the changes, which is great. And like I said, the jury's out. This is still a new approach for me, and I've done the same approach for like 6 years or whatever. So this is brand new to me. So I might have it wrong, but with the research that I've done on how people work and how behavior change works, this does seem like it would be more effective. So we'll see.
And just mention to me how you do the research. How do you gather that? And Sash, I'll be asking you about that with We the Free.
Yeah, so I've been researching. I've been looking into it's like psychological behavior in humans, right? So people who have actually done research on humans and the behaviors in humans and how humans change their behaviors. And there's a wide range of research on it. But there are a lot of core proven things that are in that world. For example, the all or nothing behaviors that people have, right? This is a negative thing. So all or nothing thinking is often associated with very, very negative conditions in people. Usually it's negative thought process that leads somebody to an all or nothing behavior. And it counts here too. So one thing I noted was that in diets, for example, or in things that people are trying to change, if they have an all or nothing mentality with it, which means that I am either doing this diet to lose weight or I'm not, that means if they eat that one cookie, that one donut, instead of just getting back on the diet the next day, they throw the whole thing out and they quit. So this is what all or nothing mentality does. And that's what I've been doing for 6 years. I've been telling people, you're vegan or you're not. There is no gray area, okay? If you're not vegan, you're an animal abuser. If you are vegan, then you're not an animal abuser. And so what I predicted is that, okay, well, that's most likely going to be a lot of people who, if they do slip up, and I've told them it's all or nothing, and then what are they going to do? Well, okay, they go for nothing then, because that's how an all or nothing mentality works. That's what it does to people. And obviously, I'm sure everybody in the world, vegans included, would much rather somebody go from eating 100% plant-based to 70% plant-based, back up to 90% plant-based, back down to 80, back up to 90 for their entire life, versus going 100% to zero because they just throw it out because they think it's all or nothing. I'm sure we all care about animals deeply, but at the end of the day, we need, one of these situations is still better than the other, even though neither of them is animal rights, of course. I'm not referring to animal rights here. I'm talking about behavior change. So it's a complicated subject, and psychology is a complicated subject, behavior change is a complicated subject. But as I said, this is for the research I've been doing, looking into these studies and looking into human behavior change, and it's led me to try some of these new tactics.
That's really interesting. I found that really interesting to listen to. I mean, it's a theme we've, really came into the animal rights movement about 10 years ago, about how we advocate, because up until then, it seemed to be a bit of a free-for-all. And it was about 10 years ago that there seemed to be a rule was kind of big. Obviously, social media replaced the forums and made it accessible. We could join them from all over the world, and it's very public. But these discussions ranged backwards and forwards. I seem to remember this time 10 years ago, particularly. And I think the only conclusion is that, as yet, none of us really know, what works and what doesn't. But what we have got is very little evidence to go on. It's only recently that the research. I mean, there was some very flawed research 10 years ago that pointed to a high recidivist rate amongst vegans. And then it turned out there was actually not vegans that had been research should be vegetarians and mainly vegetarians, which is a whole different approach because the ethics were very different. It became more about diet change, not about ethical change. I think we know that diet change is far more, you know, if you've gone, I don't plant-based for your health, you know, you're far more likely to slip off into some animal product, maybe on a social occasion or on a, just because you're feeling really healthy and thinking, hey, you know what, I can have a day off my you know. But if you're plant-based because you're ethically taking a position opposed to the willful commodification of animals, you're very unlikely to slip off that road. So this is the thing, is that we know that what sticks with vegans is the ethical considerations. But what gets people started is the food and the kind of getting into a scrambled tofu for breakfast instead of scrambled egg or something. So it's kind of like baby steps are a really important part of our movement, whether we like it or not. You know, most people come from being eating using animals. They come in a baby. You know, they are very childish and babyish about it, and all of us are the same. You know, we fall back on these ridiculous defence mechanisms, and they gradually get unpicked. So I just think it's an indication of how deeply speciesism is embedded in our culture, as to how hard it is to unpick. And once it is, it seems so simple, and it should be such an easy message to transmit. You know, Bishop, hey, you know, half hour should do it, but it clearly doesn't. And so a wide range of tactics and approaches is really important, but also informed. And Sasha, I'm really heartened by the way that We the Free particularly have invested quite a lot of resources in trying to get some actual research back off the streets, get some feedback and try and quantify it. Say, well, look, you know, this is what we're seeing. Also, Animal Think Tank have done some really good research into, you know, thousands of people. It's like, you know, messaging, what resonates, importantly, what puts people off, you know. So clearly from the Animal Think Tank work, words like exploitation, speciesism do not garner a great reaction. Whereas having a conversation about morals, the moral consideration, would appear from the research to resonate a lot better with people. If you want to have a conversation about ethics, you know, you're probably better off coming in on a moral consideration than certainly, you know, exploitation of animals and speciesism, which is a word perhaps people think, you know, you're kind of using it as a perjurous term, you know, having a go at it. Those hackles go up. But Sash, tell me a bit more about this. What have you been doing? What is We the Free? How do you conduct this feedback? How do you gain some insights into what's working and what's perhaps holding people back?
Thank you. We the Free is an organization, the way that we approach advocacy, street advocacy in particular. Well, if you, I always use advocacy as opposed to activism, and there's a difference. And again, I can talk about that and see if I can define it. The difference between the two. So We the Free is an organization. It's data-driven. So that we try to do something that works, something that's more effective, and it is about being effective rather than being right. Of course, as an animal rights activist, I would like everybody to go vegan a week ago, a year ago, 10 years, 80 years ago. Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. But is it effective using, just like what David was saying? I agree with you. Inflammatory language and what you said, Tim, as well. There is a clear data. It shows that those words and the terminology and the language that we use is not very effective. And I know what you said earlier, Tim, that there is not enough data, or perhaps not enough research has been carried out specifically within the animal rights movement. However, we can look at precedents from the previous sort of movements, going back to gay rights and pride and various other ones. Where nonviolent communication was very effective. Nonviolent act and brought together and brought unity amongst sort of groups of people. Actually, that surprised many people, and you can watch really good film that I had the pleasure of experiencing called Pride, where the miners were where the gay people were supporting miners. So and vice versa. I'm not going to go into details of about the film, but it's a really good film too. So there was a slight delay there as well. So also, so we can use those studies that have been done using a different movement or make it relatable to a different human oppression as well. And also when it comes to the street advocacy or vegan advocacy on the streets and outreach, my recommendation usually is telling your story. Because people do respond to narratives better, and that's the study and the research that Animal Think Tank have done. Because when it comes to oppression, statistics don't really matter because one victim is too many. So therefore, I think by telling people your story, they will respond better from that point of view. And something is really interesting, what David just mentioned, is all or nothing attitude. Actually, it stems from shame. And it's one of the toxic traits of shame. It's actually called that, which is all or nothing attitude, alongside perfectionism. They all actually stem from shame. So there's a lot of study have been done on that. And interestingly, I came across a really good book recently by Brian Hare. It's called Survival of the Friendliest. So something to look into. So we survive not because we are fittest, but because we're friendliest. So, but of course, there's a lot more to it. I'm only just touching the surface of the whole book. Is a lot of neuroscience in there as well. So, but it just gives you a really good insight into what might work during the advocacy. And language is very, very important. Body language as well.
Body language, indeed, yes. Interesting, you touched on the miners' strike. It's 40 years ago, and we happened to be, I say we, me and my partner, happened to be living in Leeds, right at the heart of the miners' strike, after being trashed at a festival by hundreds of police. Who were all up there for the miners' strike. We were a festival in Yorkshire, and we got mass arrests and incarcerated in huge numbers. And then I was living in Leeds during the miners' strike, so I was right at the heart of Yorkshire during that time. It's a really interesting time, and I remember the gays supporting the miners. And it was an example of. I was going to mention this actually because when I first started supporting campaign groups, and I was like 15, I got politically activist. And this, the first sort of thing I thought about intersectionality really was in the 70s. It's a really big movement for ban the bomb. Ban the bomb was huge. But there was also Save the Whales. Save the Whales was a really big campaign. And likewise, so was gay liberation. Gay liberation was huge in the 70s. And one of the first pressure groups I ever joined was, and they all had acronyms. Everything had an acronym. So it was C&D, was Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. LCC was the Legalised Cannabis Campaign. Obviously, you had the ALF as the Animal Liberation Front. And then we had GWAB, GWAB, which was Gay Wales Against the Bomb. And Gay Wales Against the Bomb was basically anybody who was supported all of these groups. And basically, GWAB was an acronym for So that was one of the first campaign groups I was part of, where Gay Rights Against Sport. We didn't get done particularly well with my skill pals. I must admit they were bemused by that one. But it's an indication when we went back to the 80s, when I first got into campaigning, and it is actually my 40th anniversary of going vegan this month. So it was during the miners' strike, living in Chaptertown and Leeds. I went vegan and met a bunch of animal rights anarchists who were all vegan, and went vegan straight away. It was a time when, and I know my pals from the 80s will pretty much validate this. It's like when you join the vegan animal rights movement, you know, everybody shared the same values. You know, we were all anti this, pro that, you know, but we all had that in common. And there's very much a very different alternative underground scene, a sort of counterculture, underclass, a collective of mainly anarchist thinking, you know, people who basically had so many shared values, you know, that we just didn't really suffer that kind of isms. Although now when I look back, of course, they were clearly all there. There was a lot of unresolved stuff that was all kind of bubbling under. But on the surface of it, it was very much a collective that all agreed on these key issues. It's only really in the last 10 years, I think the movement's grown so much that we've really seen these issues come through where we've got such a broad church of vegans and animal rights activists. That now, it's only now that we've really had to really embrace these issues. And no wonder it's been messy. And I think it's a lot better these days, partly because we can have conversations like this and understand different positions better. And I think it comes down to, and this cuts through so many different parts of the movement. You know, the question is like, where do we draw the line? That's the question that comes up time and again. You know, where do we draw the line? David, you mentioned maybe changing the way you advocate. But we have to remember that we're advocating for victims, and what one more victim is another victim that has been, you know, abandoned. And as animal rights advocates, we have to be advocating for all animals at all times. So it's a very difficult one to be then kind of going, oh, you know, well, what about those ones? Just work on those ones for now, because it feels like we're letting down the animals. It's a big drive to have to go for perfection because it's an individual's life at stake, you know. So it's a really important principle that we try and advocate for all animals. But at the same time, you know, we can't push people away by demanding this level that perhaps they're not ready to achieve. I mean, it's a real paradox, I think, for animal advocates, a really difficult one. And where do we draw the line with human rights and animal rights? Where do we draw the line with how we advocate? Do we advocate baby steps? Do we advocate for plant-based diets and low-hanging fruit? Or do we advocate for justice for animals at all times? And I mean, what do you use? What processes do you use, David, to, well, you know, I know you've asked this question yourself, you know, where do you draw the line?
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah, I can answer you. So, my focus can you hear me or not?
Yeah.
I don't know how delayed I am right now. Can you hear me right
Yes.
now? All right, super delayed then.
Yes.
It's fine. Cool, I'll talk. What processes do I use? Well, the reason I changed recently is through an acknowledgement that, as I said, I don't believe that I'm going to, or we are going to achieve animal liberation in the next 20 years. I'm sorry if that's bad news for anybody, and I want to, don't get me wrong, of course I want to, we all want to, and I empathize massively with what you said about where do we draw the line, because at the end of the day, one victim is too many. I agree. But when we compare our situation and the animals' situation with other movements that have been successful, there are some tough pills that we have to swallow. For example, the abolition of slavery in the UK, the abolitionists didn't immediately go for an abolition of slavery because it wasn't possible. So they had to make that tough decision to actually go for other more easily reachable targets. One of those targets was to try to get the slave trade banned. But getting the slave trade banned may seem like a really big win, because they did succeed, by the way. That was one of the first big successes they had, as far as I know. And that might seem like a really big win, but it wasn't a big win to them, because by getting the trade banned, they had simply abandoned millions of slaves across the British Empire by not going for the abolition. That's how they saw it, the same way we see it, the same way that we beat ourselves up when, we get somebody to eliminate dairy. We're beating ourselves up because what about all the animals that are being killed in the meat industry? And it's a good reason to beat ourselves up. It is, because it's horrible. Oh my God, that's a loud bark. Whose doggo is that?
Benny, I do apologize.
It's Benny, okay. No worries. It was just like right in the ear.
I'm not apologizing. He doesn't.
So if okay, my point here is that if even the abolitionist movement with human slaves had to make some compromises in achieving liberation for humans, we are really not facing reality if we don't realize that we are going to have to compromise on our path to getting liberation for animals. And I don't mean compromise as in like give up. I mean as in like, to achieve liberation, we're going to have to make some strategic decisions along the way that may seem like they go against abolition, but they don't. They are absolutely steps that we need to take the same way that we had to take those same steps in various human rights movements. And with animals, animals, the non-human animals, they have that one thing that differentiates them, that makes this whole thing so much more difficult. The fact that they're not human. So that's my point. That's my takeaway point. If it took all of that to do this for humans, imagine how much we're going to have to do. We can't possibly just do it differently for animals. Like, it's going to have to be down the same path they took, with probably even more small compromises and even more incremental change, unfortunately, which it's not anything anyone wants to hear, but is it not the reality? I mean, I'm yet to hear somebody,
bear you out. Yeah, history will bear you out. That is the way changes. They're happening incrementally. I think it's important to distinguish between individual change and system change, institutional change, corporation change. That is very much has to be consensus. You're not going to get your school to go vegan overnight, but you may well get your school to introduce more plant-based meals, and then maybe become the default as plant-based meals. And then it might be that, if you do want meat, dairy, you have to order it in specially. And then, there may be steps towards it, but that's different. And very much incremental steps are required for system change, corporation, institutional change. For individual change, a lot of people would say, well, we should always stick to putting forward the animal rights position, that animals have a right not to be commodified, and that we should be looking to align our lifestyle choices with those values, and work towards that as a matter of justice for animals. Never mind, any of the baby steps or the rest of it. But history doesn't bear. It doesn't bear. So you're right, and we've studied. So actually, you mentioned other social justice movements. We mentioned the Freedom to Marry campaign in the USA. I know the Animal think tank have highlighted that as a really good model for achieving social change in quite a short time against all odds. So it's a big deal, and it comes down. I mean, we've got a panel on this actually. It's moving beyond the welfare paradigm, and it is trying to reframe that argument, kind of welfare abolition, trying to put it in a better picture of inside, outside goals. Talked about individual change and corporation change, the different tactics and strategies required, different gains, different victories, different targets, but together they can work well. And I do like the way that welfare reforms have been reframed as simple rights. And certainly anybody who's ever been in jail will know about welfare reforms. If you were in a 2-cell designed for 2, and then the overcrowding, suddenly you've got 3 of you in a cell designed for 2, which isn't really big enough for 1, then you know about welfare reforms and how they impact, and how, you know, welfare reforms are actually pretty big victories for the animals that are subjected to that. But of course, it's a big argument that welfare reform is just treacherous in this welfare paradigm, and without having splits, you know, recognizing that a lot of vegans support welfare reforms and also feel much like you've just expressed, David. It's like, well, we're not going to go vegan overnight. We have to be pragmatic. You know, I'll be honest, there's slightly red flags to me when I hear those words, but I hear, you know, I don't think we should, as vegans, you know, we've got welfare people to do welfare. RSPCA can do the welfare. The vegans should be doing the ending the use of animals. That should be our clear goal, animal liberation. And we shouldn't settle for less. But I understand that we have to employ strategies and tactics that may appear to be not only settling for less, but be even contradictory. It's a difficult one. But how we move beyond the welfare paradigm is going to be a really interesting panel. I'm really looking forward to that one, actually. Sash, what's your thoughts about that? About, you know, establishing perhaps more of an animal rights position in the vegan movement. I mean, it's very much what you would call probably new welfare. You know, we focus a lot on treatment, cruelty, suffering. You know, there's lots of investigations into the poor standards and treatment of animals, but less on the fundamental wrong. You know, and I'd actually love to say I've seen Animal Aid recently with some really good social media posters focusing on the fundamental wrongs. This is what Go Vegan World do. They focus on the fundamental wrong in their messaging, whereas most of the other groups will focus on the, you know, the horror of the conditions that this farm has been discovered. They all read to veganism. They're all going back to, well, the answer is go vegan. But there's a danger that, you know, we're just going to get stuck in this welfare paradigm forever because we can't quite get out of it. How are we going to get out of it? What's your view on that before we end up and wrap up our hour quickly? In 60 seconds. How are we going to do it, Sash?
Thank you. I'll try to be. And the pressure is on. So time me. So when it comes to the animal rights, the sad reality of that is the victim is not here to speak for themselves. Whereas, like somebody from, as a gay person, I can speak from my experiences, and it's like, well, this is what I am going through right now. And whereas the non-human animals cannot, so we unfortunately we have to kind of resort to something like 3-minute movie challenge, where we have to show them that, well, look, they are bleeding, their throats are being cut. You see what I mean? Just like, can we just please stop? It's you know, they feel pain, and then suddenly, because they can't speak for themselves from that point of view, we're not including them. We can't. How do they? How can they? It's just simply be impossible. So therefore, humans tend to impose that, oh, because they're specifically bred for that, oh, because of this, oh, because of all sorts of distractions that comes into it. So if it was if we look at it from the human oppression point of view, then of course, you know, human victims can speak for themselves. I can speak for myself here, and that's the difficulty, because we're talking about hundreds of years, centuries of social norm. And it's incredibly difficult where the victims cannot just stand up and just like, look, you know, I don't like this, even though that they try to sort of voice it in any other way by trying to escape, screaming, whatever that is. But we're just not listening, sadly, simply because of the human privilege and the position that we put those non-human animals in. And in terms of the welfare and animal rights, I mean, of course, you know, like I said earlier, you know, I want everybody to go vegan ages ago. So what happens in the interim? What happens to those animals that are currently in the farms and being mistreated? So what happens to them then? Do we just say, oh, sod them all, you know, and It's we're just going to be focusing, and our goal is to sort of for them to be included in the legislation, and that for them to have the rights that we want to have, and obviously the victims want to have. So what happens to them? So surely there must be some element of welfare, but it's obvious it goes without saying, it should not be the end goal.
I mean, it's a moral deliberation for us. You know, it should be focused on ending the use of all animals, or focus on ensuring that the lives of the animals that are currently in those oppressive systems are improved. And you know, that's one of the reasons that this panel wants to reframe this discussion, because this isn't welfare versus abolition. This goes deeper than that. Yes, there's really relevant and important arguments and debates about whether welfare holds back a move to veganism. And as we know, there's a paper published just this year that does support that you know, higher welfare reforms hold back people's progression to veganism. So there is some evidence-based, you know, work that would support that theory, and it's a really important one. So it's a really important debate to have, and it's very important that I think, especially new vegan activists, vegan people coming into the vegan movement, have some good, solid, clear debates and discussions about this that they can learn from and get up to speed with. But there needs to be, I would say, a new respect. You know, I don't like seeing welfare as used as a pejorative term, or indeed new welfareism. I don't see any value in that at all. But at the same time, you know, labeling somebody who holds an animal rights position as being a militant extreme vegan just because they take a position opposed to the willful commodification of all animals, you know, that's not an extreme militant position. It's a fundamental animal rights position that underpins veganism. So I don't see that, you know, if we could, again, a bit like with the animal rights, human rights, if we can diffuse some of this and frame it in a more productive, inclusive way, recognizing that we do all have an animal liberation goal, but we also have other considerations, and we have to respect each other's views on this and try and be, you know, clear about our own positions whilst also accommodating and understanding without necessarily encouraging other positions, certainly more understanding. David, I would guess that you would agree with that. But what's your current take in a minute or two before we wrap up on this? Always a hot topic, you know, big splits in the past. What do you feel?
I completely empathize with both sides of this debate, because obviously I empathize massively with the people who are against welfareism. I was against welfareism for a long time because I saw it as opposition to abolition for animals. I saw it as, it's just trying to make things more comfortable for animals, and that's not our goal. And there are welfarist organizations out there, and their goal is simply to just make the animal products more ethical. Like, they exist. They don't have any long-term goal or long-term strategy. They just want to keep, they actually eat animals themselves. So there are welfarist organizations out there like that. But what I learned, and like through my work and through my collaborations with different people and speaking with them, is that, look, I'll first tell you where I'm coming from here, that I am not ignorant of what goes on with animals. Actually, I'm in a rare position, probably a very rare position for people in our movement, in that I am face to face with the victims on a very regular basis through a project that I'm doing currently. And I'm collaborating with many people who are also face to face with the victims on a very regular basis because of the line of work they're in. And through speaking with these people, and through my own experience, and through speaking with the people who I'm about to talk about, I've realized that the welfarists that a lot of people are not aware of are the ones who are abolitionists, but have placed themselves as welfarists in positions of power in government and in positions of power in influential bodies. And what they're doing is they're working in those positions with the guidance of their own abolitionist values and the guidance of the abolitionist organizations who have placed them there and have been able to get them there. However, to the people that they're working with, they're a welfarist. And what this allows us to do is to have somebody on the inside pushing and pulling in the ways that are going to make big changes without the government spotting that this person's actually a hardcore animal rights activist and wants abolition of the entire industry. Now, I wasn't aware this existed until spending time with these people. And these people I'm referring to, the people on the ground face to face with the victims every day, they are working with these organizations and with these welfareists because they are aware of this strategy and they are aware of how deep this goes. So you mentioned earlier that welfareism can encourage people maybe to not go vegan. That may be the case. That might be a price that we need to pay for top-down change, because top-down change can only come this way. It's not going to come any other way. It's only going to come when we have lots of people inside those systems, and we can't have people inside those systems unless they pose as welfareists. So, so that's the very complicated system explained very, very briefly. But this is all something I became aware of recently. So I'm very supportive of that. I'm much less supportive of the welfareists who are actually just trying to feel less bad about eating a burger. Like, I'm not very supportive of them. In fact, I'm not supportive of them whatsoever. But the welfareists who are actually using strategy, I'm definitely supportive of them.
That is a really interesting insight. And I know that's echoed again out of the think tank between this free frame, the inside-outside game, and particularly now that we have a Labour government. And also people like Cara Denyer, who's a Green MP, who is an animal rights advocate, but is now going to be looking at animal welfare reforms because that's within their power to actually influence. It's something I did ask her about in an interview that was really interesting. Likewise, Kerry McCarthy and Claire Hazelgrove, who are Labour MPs with the remit working. Kerry McCarthy's been vegan 25, 30 years now. You know, there are some really top people inside government capable of implementing systems of change. And also people who carefully position themselves just on the outside of the inside game. So someone like Dale Vince, you know, has been hugely supportive of the Labour government, both as a donor but also as a foot soldier, time and again, and on the media, but isn't part of the government. He's actually playing the outside game because he's outside of that structure, and he can say what he wants, but he can also hold the government to account probably more than any of us because he's supported them so much. And that's a really clever strategy. So there are really clever strategies. Gentlemen, we could talk all night. I'm sure we could. I'd love to. It's been a really interesting discussion. Sorry we lost Alan earlier. That was due to just a technical hitch on the boat. The internet obviously needed warming up again. Something that got in the way. But never mind, it was great to have Alan on earlier. Sash, it's been brilliant to have you all the way through this. I know you're playing a full part in the conference in 2 weeks' time now. I look forward to it. It's quite an immense gathering, actually. Do have a look at the website and all the speakers and panels and everything. It's pretty impressive. And David, I'm really interested. I've been very interested to hear your views, how they're changing, how they're evolving. This is really important. You know, growth within the movement comes from within. It's as individuals within the movement grow and change. That helps, you know, act as a catalyst for bigger change on a broader picture. And just to wrap up too, I'm very much aware that a lot of people across the world are looking at the UK right now, how we're managing these issues, how we're dealing with these. And I'm really grateful that there's enough adults in the room in the UK, in our movement, to have these supportive conversations, seeking learning outcomes and avoiding these punitive, puritanical, exclusionary things that we've seen over the years, you know, where it's just ended in tears. We've had massive tear-ups and it's just got so messy. So on that note, thank you both. David, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, appreciate it.
And Sash, thanks for joining us. Yeah, and we can say goodnight now. Thank you, everybody who's been listening. Thank you for making the comments. And I'm sure we can have a little look later and maybe we might address anything on Facebook or YouTube and such like. We'll be back next week. There's going to be another one. Brilliant. I can't remember who it is. From Animal Justice Project and Wendy McGovern from the Animal Rights Show, talking about very much those similar issues. So tune in again. Thank you once again, people. It's been a pleasure. and I hope to see you at the conference. Good night.
Thanks. Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Good night.